Autumn baskets. So your summer baskets are looking a little bit tired, maybe a bit bedraggled. Now's the time to think about making your autumn planters. What do you need to know? Well, it kind of depends when you start planting. If it's in August, September, you've still got time to grow some of the plants. And if it's October, November, it's almost too late. You're going to have to buy fully flowering plants. So in August, you've still got time to sow some seeds. You could do violas and pansies and they'll grow and flower in time for the autumn. So if you sow them in August, you'll end up with a plant maybe this size at the beginning of September, and then a few weeks later it'll be this size, and 6 weeks later it'll be this size, so fully flowering. So your plants will be big enough to flower all the way through the autumn and the winter. Is it too late to sow in September? Well, it is for the autumn, but we're actually still sowing now, and these plants will flower in January, February, March. So if we sow, we'll end up with a plug plant like this at the end of September, beginning of October. And it'll sort of hibernate for the winter and then start growing again in the spring. So although it won't flower for the winter, you could still sow now and have a good display in January, February, March. What if it's September? Well, it's almost too late to sow now for the autumn planters. So what you could do is buy plug plants, and they're available online. And what you'll get is a little plug plant sent through the post. And this one's probably had a couple of weeks in the pot. And then, as we said, it grows quite quickly to that size and then that size. So if you bought plug plants at the beginning of September, you'll still be alright. You'll end up with a big flowering plant. So in September, I can't get any plug plants, and I'm thinking I still want to make my planter. So what you really want is packs of bedding, and they're available in the supermarkets and garden centres. And think of them as just a really big plug plant. So they're at this stage. So it's halfway between a plug plant and the finished plant. So half the work's done for you. So what you could do, where you might use, say, 3 of these in a hanging basket or a patio pot, you could use 6 of these and get the same effect. So think of packs of bedding as just large plug plants, and you can use them pretty much up till the end of September. Once you get to October, they're not really going to grow outside, so you need to make sure all the work's done in August and September. Or buy fully flowering plants in October and November like this. What about buying pots of plants? So pots of plants are the next size up from bedding. So this is about the size you would get in a bedding pack. And then this is the size you would expect to see in a 9cm pot, or even a 10cm pot. Thing is, it's about 4 or 5 weeks older, so you don't have to wait for it to start flowering. And you can see this one is absolutely covered in flowers, so almost immediately would fill your basket or your pot with colour. It's a bit older, so it will flower for longer. So the advantage of pots is that they've actually done a lot of their growing already, so they're bigger. So an example of this would be, say, an ivy. So this would be maybe an ivy that would be sold in a pack, so it's quite small. But if you grow it on, so we grow these on in the nursery to make them trail, this is about 6 weeks later. So it's actually got a decent trail, and you could use this for hanging baskets or pots. Thing is, by the end of September, October, this ivy can't grow this big because it's got colder and everything stops growing. So if you want an ivy with a trail, you really have to buy an ivy with a trail, or buy it in August and grow your own. So perhaps the most important thing about buying your plants for the autumn is that they have almost finished growing. So if you buy them in August, September, you've got about 4 or 5 weeks where they'll carry on growing. But by the time you get to October and November, it is too cold, they will have stopped growing. So if you buy a small plant in October, November, it won't grow into a big plant. It will just stop and stay the same size. So what you buy and how big it is slightly determined by when you start making your baskets. If you start early, you can get away with small plants. If you've left it till the end of September, October, you really need to use fully sized plants in flower. So how do I add some colour to my autumn baskets and hanging baskets? Thing is, you don't have as much choice. In the spring and the summer, there are lots of plants that will grow and flower. That will give you all sorts of range of colours and shapes and sizes. In the autumn, there's much less choice because you really only got violas and pansies that will add some colour. Some violas will flower all the way through the winter. And a lot of the autumn plants just flower for the autumn and need to be replaced. So really we're talking about plants that are in flower in September, October that will survive all the way through maybe till Christmas. So perhaps the most common one is violas. So there's a big wide range of violas and pansies. If you buy them in colour, they will carry on flowering all the way through up to Christmas. We particularly like ice babies, and there are one called Endurio, which are proper true hardy violas that will flower pretty much all the way through the winter, but also flower all the way through the spring as well. In fact, we've seen them flowering all the way up to August. So it's almost a 12-month viola. So this is not your normal viola. This is a semi-trailing viola that's been bred specifically to flower all the way through the winter. So it's day neutral. So even in short days through the winter, it will carry on throwing some flowers. So we use one called Ice Babies, but there is one called Injurio. And there are other ones on the market as well. So after violas, perhaps the second most common plant is cyclamen. Once thought to be just a house plant, but we now know they make a really good autumn bedding plant. Thing is, try and buy them with some flowers on, or try and buy them in flower. It's much cooler outside, so it takes longer for the flowers to develop. So really you want to buy something that has got a few flowers on and it'll carry on flowering. So why would cyclamen work outside? They're not really happy in the house. It's too hot, too dark, and the atmosphere is too dry. So they actually quite enjoy being outside in the autumn. So a cool air, doesn't mind a little bit of rain as long as there's a breeze to dry them off again. So they actually make really good patio plants and hanging basket plants. What about chrysanths, autumn chrysanths? There are a wide range of chrysanths for the autumn, but perhaps the best known ones are these Belgian chrysanths. Lots of masses of little flowers, incredibly tough. So this chrysanth has been outside all summer and it's just started to flower. You'll get between 6 and 8 weeks off this plant. It'll take some frost. It doesn't mind rain. The main thing is probably take a few dead flowers off as they come ready, and more buds will come from underneath. The other thing we've discovered is they're pretty much hardy. If you put them in the garden when you're finished with them, quite often they'll just flower again each year. So there are the normal range of chrysanthemum colours: purples, reds, whites, yellows, pinks. Thing is, they make a really neat habit. So you might only need one of these for a planter, and it'll do the job for the autumn for you. So what if I don't want a huge chrysanth? Well, if you see one like this covered in small buds in a smaller pot, it'll still be the same plant. It's just been potted later, so it hasn't grown quite as big. So these are potted in July. That allows them to grow really big before they start flowering. If you potted it later in, say, August, it would be much smaller before it started flowering. So even a small chrysanth is still an autumn chrysanth and would do a good job. What about autumn heathers? Well, these are autumn heathers, but you're not your normal kind of autumn heather. So we have got a blog on the website if you want to check them out. There are different kinds of heathers that are sold in the autumn. These are bud-bearing heathers, so they might be called garden girls or garden beauty or something like that. Thing is, these are what look like flowers, are just coloured buds. They never open, and they stay like that all the way through till about Christmas. So what happens is that they flower for a really long time. So these are called bud-bearing heathers and not like normal heathers. So this is be a winter heather, so this wouldn't actually flower until December and January. And then these ones have kind of replaced the horrible but really popular painted heathers. So what they would do is just get a normal heather and paint it blue, pink, white, yellow. But it was only a coloured dye. It wasn't actually the colour of the flowers. So you'll now find in the autumn masses of these colourful bud-bearing heathers. They can be sort of this size or can be smaller. It just depends the way they've grown them. The main thing you need to know is that they don't ever let them dry out before you buy them, because they don't really recover. Also, it's a calluna, so if you plant it in the garden when it's finished flowering, it needs a really acid soil. It's related to the heather that grows on the hills, so it needs special soil if you're going to try and keep it. But really, these autumn heathers, you should think of them as just instant colour, like a bunch of flowers that actually last for such a long time, 8 to 12 weeks. So this is a primrose. By the end of September, early October, you can have a primrose in flower in the autumn. And that is the same as a spring primrose. It's just that it's been potted early, and it's a variety that will flower in the autumn, stop, and then flower again in the spring. So as long as you see them with buds or flowers on, you'll know it'll be an autumn flowering primrose. And they can be really effective. So you can also buy bellis that flowers in the autumn. Thing is, you don't really know looking at it if it's going to flower in the autumn or in the spring. So if you buy bellis in the autumn in flower, it'll carry on all the way through the winter. Makes it a really effective winter plant. Do you want to make your planter look a little bit more exotic? These ornamental chilies are the ones. So they look tender, but actually they last all the way up till Christmas. The chilies are really tough, so it can just add a bit of exotic colour to your planters. So we talked about buying some flowers for your autumn planters, but perhaps almost important is the foliage, because the foliage is going to last all the way through the winter. The flowers might come and go, but if you choose the right foliage, your planter will look good all the way through the winter. So you might have to pay a little bit more for your autumn foliage. The thing is, it's hardy and will probably survive, so you might get 2 or 3 years out of it. You can even plant it in the garden when you're finished. So something like Euonymus makes a pretty good garden shrub. So you could have 2 or 3 years in your planter and then you could put it in the garden. So there is a wide range of things that you could use in the autumn, almost anything that looks colourful in foliage that will survive the winter. So I've kind of split it into 2 groups, cool and warm. So you could have a kind of planting theme. So I think you could see that our white heather or white cyclamen might go quite well with the silvers and the greens in a cool kind of theme. Also, with our hot theme, you could match it with some warm colours like our red heather, our yellow violas, or red and yellow violas. That would match quite well with the bronze of the fern or the golden of the Euonymus, or even the gold in the Lamium. So you can see that you could kind of make a warm one and a cool one. So perhaps the one that we use most for the autumn is ivies. So you can buy ivies quite small and grow them out to get a bit of a decent trail on them. So ivies can be gold, green and silver. Thing is, buy them early enough and let them grow on. You won't lose them, they'll become old faithfuls. You could use this ivy for the winter, take it out, put it in the garden or put it in a pot and use it again next year. We have some ivy in hanging baskets that's been there for 3 years. So you never really lose them. So it's worth investing in quite a decent ivy at the beginning and then use it for 2 or 3 years. So also have a look on the alpine bench at the sedums. This is sedum sediform gold. If you grow it in a pot and just look after it, it'll grow huge. And you can imagine that trailing off the front of a planter or in a hanging basket. So there are orange and reds and greens and golds in sedums that you could use in your autumn baskets. So this is Calocephalus. Looks like cotton wool, doesn't it? But it's made up of tiny little stems, all silvery and white. So we've tried it a few years now, and it is borderline hardy. So if you put it in the autumn, in most winters it'll come through into the spring, give it a little trim, and it'll still keep its shape. So this is a really good contrasting silver foliage to match with whites and pinks. If you want silver, what about the humble Cineraria? You may even have this left over from your summer bedding. Just dig it up and use it for the centre of the pot. Cineraria is pretty much nearly hardy and will survive all the way through the winter. Another one good for trailing is Lamium. So this is a Lamium gold and silver, which looks really good in a hot pot. And then this is Lamium beacon silver. So it's lovely silver leaves, quite felty. Thing is, it grows really fast. So we told you that the Lamium grows quite fast. This is a cutting that's only been in about 3 or 4 weeks, but if you give it about 6 weeks, you'll end up with something like this. So if it has a fault, it can grow too big for your hanging baskets. So this is another one that we use quite often in the autumn. This is Lysmachia gold, or Lysmachia aurea creeping jenny. You'll find it on the alpine bench. Thing is, if you pot it and grow it, it'll grow a really long trail. So you could have a hanging basket with Lysmachia hanging over the side. You may even have this left from your summer baskets, because we do like it in summer baskets as well. But it's properly hardy. So you can actually use grasses in the autumn as well. So these are Caryxes, quite tall ones. So this is Caryx phoenix green. So in a pot, it can look really good, just waving gently in the wind. For a hot one, you can use Caryx Comens bronze. Looks dead, but it's not. If you're looking for a slightly better behaved Caryx, you can look for Caryx Evergold, which is a gold version, and then there's a silver version. And these only grow about 6 inches high. And again, properly hardy. Looking for something slightly different that looks like a grass, but quite well behaved, this is Ophiopogon. Deep black leaves, very slow growing. This you could use in your planters for years and years. So you may have noticed that we use quite a few ferns in our planters. The thing is, the shape's good for the middle, and the leaves are a different texture to everything else. These are evergreen ferns, these are Dryopterus, so they actually keep their foliage on through the winter. Again, just use them in your baskets, maybe 1 or 2 years, then you can plant them in the garden. So ferns have all different kinds of foliage, and even ones with bronze foliage. Thing is, ferns grow really slowly, so there's no point in putting a small fern in. Make sure you grow it to a decent size before you put it in. So we mentioned Euonymus. We quite like Euonymus. You can buy them as quite a small plant and they look quite attractive, but they carry on growing. So even after 6 months, you might end up with one this size. So a little bit like we said before, if you want this size, you need to buy that size to put in your autumn planter. This won't grow this size just in a few weeks. So this plant was this size in July. So if you bought one of these in July and potted it, you would end up about this size. So the thing is with Euonymus is, again, it could have 2 or 3 years as the centre of your planter. Then you could put it in the garden. You can actually trim and shape it, so you could end up with a ball shape or a pyramid shape. So these are Japanese Euonymus, so you can have a silver version or a gold version. So we use quite a lot of conifers in our planters. We know that the foliage will last all the way through the winter. Next year it will start growing, and by the end of next year it could be double the size. So again, it's not a short-term measure. You could keep it for 2 or 3 years in your planters before you put it in the garden. So these are Elwoodii, often sold as a dwarf conifer. They're not dwarf conifers, they grow massive. They grow 30, 40 foot high. But if you trim them, they can be kept small. And then this is a gold version, and you can have one with white tips and gold tips. So they make really good planters. And then this is Wilma, distinctively citrusy smell from the foliage, quite slightly prickly. You'll see lots of this sold in the autumn. They make really good plants. Not quite as hardy as the Elwoodii, but they normally survive most winters. And again, like a box or a Euonymus, you can trim it into shapes. You could have a pyramid or a ball shape or a tear. So you might be buying it this year for $2.99, but by next year it'll be worth $4.99 or $5.99. So you may have to spend a little bit of money buying a bit of conifer to put in your planter. The thing is, it's going to last for ages, and you can put it in the garden and use it afterwards. So you could use almost anything for your autumn planters for foliage. The main thing is it has to be hardy and survive the winter. So you're ready to start making your planter or your patio pot. How many plants do you need? Thing is, we already said that actually they're not going to grow that much in the autumn. It's not like the spring when you plant them and they grow bigger and bigger. In the autumn, they're pretty much going to grow really slowly or not at all. So you need to put enough big plants in. If you're going for small plants, you either have to start in August or you put more plants in. So here we are with a 12-inch hanging basket. This one's actually wicker, but you could do it in a plastic basket or it could be a patio pot. We've put 3 trailing ivies in. Thing is, they need to be trailing when you put them in. If you go this small, you're going to be waiting ages for it to actually start trailing. So you need to buy an ivy with a trail to put in. So we have 3 longish trailing ivies. And now we have 3 patches of violas. If you're buying those pots and they're quite big, you only need 3 plants. If they're buying them in a pack, maybe a 6-pack, and they're quite small, you might need to put 2 in each one. So you might need a whole 6-pack to do that. So for the middle, we need a little bit of height. In this case, we've gone for a cyclamen, but it could have been a heather, or it could be a chrysanthemum, or you could go for foliage. You could do a grass, or a Cineraria, or a fern. The thing is, you need a little bit of height in the middle. So what happens when this gets to Christmas time? Well, our violas will carry on growing, but our cyclamen might be a bit finished, so you can pop it out and put something else in. So you could do a similar planting scheme in this planter. So we have a central plant, which is a bit taller. In this case, it's a heather. But we've just gone round with violas, rather than violas and trailing. But you could have some trailing down the side as well. So all we have in this one is a heather. And we actually have 6 viola plugs that have been allowed to grow. Again, if you're doing it as a pack, you might actually need to put double the amount in. You might need 2 packs of violas to get the same effect. So the basic structure of our 13-14-inch planter or hanging basket is something tall for the middle. Could be foliage like this fern, or it could be flowering like a chrysanth. And then we have 3 trailing ivies or something trailing down the sides. And we have 3 patches of violas. We've put contrasting colours in, so you've got 6 plants in round the basket. If it was pack bedding, you might need to put 12 in just to fill it out. And then we have left a gap here, which we take out and we drop something in. So it could be a cyclamen. So you could go for cyclamen there, or you could go for heathers, or it could be chrysanths. It could be almost anything that you drop in. And the thing is that when that flower's finished, which might be, say, Christmas, take it out, put some primroses in. This basket will last all the way through the winter. And that's the same with most of your autumn baskets. If you make the structure out of evergreen plants, and you can change the colour if you want. So just to recap, so our 12-inch basket had one big plant for the middle, and then 6 plants around the edge. So it could be 3 trailing and 3 flowering, or it could be all 6 flowering. But when we got to our 14, we need something big for the middle. We've got 3 trailing, we've got 3 patches of violas, and then we've put 3 patches of flowering. So we've really packed the basket. But you have to, because it's not going to grow. It just has to be in flower, and it'll pretty much stand there all the way through up till Christmas. So how do I look after my autumn planter or hanging basket? There's only really 2 things you need to worry about: watering and deadheading. So even though it might be raining through the autumn, quite often your patio pot or hanging basket is actually dry. So what you need to do is get in the habit of watering it regularly. So why would it be dry? Well, quite often a hanging basket's under the eaves in the house. It doesn't actually get any rain. And with the patio pot, there's a lot of plants in there, so they can dry out quite quickly. So just get in the habit of checking them for water. And then perhaps the other thing you need to do is to deadhead the flowers regularly, because you want the flowers to keep going. So even violas, you need to get in the habit of taking off the dead flowers, but just as they turn into seed pods. So this one, for instance, the petals are finished, but it'll leave behind a seed pod, which will take some of the energy away from the rest of the flowers. So if it sets a lot of seeds, your viola thinks, oh, job done, don't need to flower anymore. So by taking the old seed heads and seed pods off, you'll encourage it to flower more. And the same applies to cyclamen. If you take the dead flowers off, it'll carry on flowering. And that applies to nearly all of your autumn flowering plants, like chrysanthemums as well. And then having said that you need to keep an eye on the watering and keep them well watered, it is possible in October, November, December for them to get too wet. And what you usually find with planters and containers is maybe the drainage isn't good enough. So this one, decorative pot, only has a tiny hole. So when it's raining a lot, the water builds up in the pot, and that can actually get waterlogged. Sometimes the base seals itself off and it can fill up with water. So really, your autumn planters, you need to make sure there's some good drainage. And if it's something like this with just a tiny hole in it, just raise it up off the ground by using some little flags or some stones, or what they call pot feet, which just lifts it off the ground and lets the water drain away. And also what we see quite often is that the hanging baskets can fill up with water because the liner, there isn't enough holes in the liner. So sometimes you may just want to poke another hole in the liner to drain the water out. So sometimes people put a lot of effort into the summer planters and forget about the autumn planters. Thing is, they're really easy. Half of it is structural plants that survive the winter. And then really, you just want a bit of autumn colour. Nothing could be easier than violas and pansies, cyclamen, heathers. Dead easy. Just put them in and forget about them. Thing is, once it's finished flowering by Christmas, you can take the flowering plants out. You've still got your structure left, and just put some primroses in, or put some spring flowered bulbs in. So actually, you get 2 uses out of your autumn planters. The only thing I would say is plant them up early.